Welcome back, my sweet heretic. Before we begin, O wanderer of the dark, draw a deep breath and settle comfortably. Let the noise of the day fade to ash. Know this first. What you are about to hear is a story woven from myth, history, and whispers that drift through the centuries. It is told with reverence, never disrespect toward any faith or figure it names. Every fragment you'll hear lives freely across the vast halls of the internet. I have only gathered them into shape to preserve the story's tone. I will refrain from naming specific figures and instead refer to them as the first man and the woman of the garden. If tales like this keep you company through the hours of shadow, subscribe to this temple of night. Leave your comment below. Tell us where in the world you are when the darkness finds you, and what time it is when the stars claim you. Now, be still. The first woman waits.
The night opens its eyes. Beneath a sky stitched with slow-moving stars, the wind moves like breath through the ruins of forgotten temples. It smells of dust, salt, and the faint trace of myrrh, like prayers that were never answered. Somewhere above that stillness, Nyx watches. She does not speak. She only observes, her gaze a mirror for everything that has ever defied the light. Light and soil wrestled themselves into order. It is the first morning. The earth exhales mist that glows as if lit from within, and from that breath two figures rise. Their skin holds the same red tone as the clay that shaped them. Their hair shines with the same gold dust that still floats in the air. They are warm before the sun learns how to burn. For a while there is only wonder. The world is so young that even rivers are still choosing which direction to take. Birds rehearse the idea of flight. Trees stretch upward, uncertain whether to seek light or shadow. Every leaf carries the taste of invention. They stand together, the first man and Lilith, equal in height, equal in astonishment. When they look at each other, they see not reflection but resonance, as if the universe has finally found a chord that fits. Eden itself seems to sigh content. The grass folds around their ankles like blessing. Water hums its endless vowel. They walk and the ground warms beneath their feet. They speak and the air bends to listen. Creation watches its first conversation. Name them. The voice of the one above whispers. And the first man obeys. He points. Lion, fig, thunder, and each sound becomes a small crown placed upon the thing it marks. Lilith watches the act of naming with curiosity rather than envy. She tastes the words before repeating them, feeling their edges cut and glitter on her tongue. She wonders why one sound should matter more than another. When they rest, she shapes small figures out of wet clay, imitations of themselves, and laughs as they crumble back into the soil. The first man does not laugh. His eyes search hers for agreement, not amusement. Already there is a distance forming, thin as spider silk, but strong as intention. In the evenings, though evening is only a pause in light, not yet the rule of dark, she listens to the wind whisper through the reeds. It carries secrets that predate the garden. It tells of a name older than the first dawn, a syllable that belongs to no tongue. She repeats it softly, testing its weight, and the trees shiver though there is no breeze. Eden is perfect, which is to say fragile. Perfection allows no movement without fraction. The first man begins to measure. Lilith begins to question. He feels ownership bloom like a vine around his certainty. She feels the same vine tighten around her throat. Still they try. For a time their laughter is genuine. They walk together beneath the fig trees, tracing new constellations out of fireflies. They drink water that mirrors their faces, so clearly it seems to speak. Yet beneath every sweetness lies the echo of command. When the first man reaches to guide her hands and asks her to lie beneath him, something small and unseen twists in the soil. The fruit on the branches grows heavier. The birds forget their songs. She steps back. The distance between them becomes visible for the first time. "You are of me," he says, uncertain whether it is praise or decree. "I am of earth," she answers. "The same as you." Their voices collide like flint. Sparks rise, invisible but real. That night she dreams of flight. Not wings. She has never seen wings. But the idea of leaving without moving, of being elsewhere while still standing on the same ground. When she wakes, the dawn looks different, harder around the edges. The animals do not approach her. Even the flowers seem to tilt toward the first man's shadow. She kneels at the river and studies her reflection. The water hesitates before showing her face, as though considering whether to tell the truth. What it reveals is both familiar and foreign. A woman shaped by the same dust yet unwilling to return to it. The sky brightens, the garden hums with purpose. The first man calls her name, and for the first time she does not answer. She traces a circle in the sand and whispers the strange syllable the wind taught her, the secret name of the one above, an act forbidden even to angels. The circle glows faintly, the color of memory before guilt. Power moves through her, not anger, not grace, something older than either. She feels the garden tilt, the river pauses mid-current, waiting to see what she will become. The first man's footsteps rush toward her, heavy with alarm. He reaches out, meaning to stop her, or perhaps to claim her again, but the air around her thickens. Light sharpens into wings, black, luminous, impossible. The ground trembles under the sudden absence of obedience. Lilith rises. The wind tears through the garden like a trumpet. Leaves scatter. The naming voice of the first man turns into a shout swallowed by distance. She does not look back. Paradise shrinks to a single point of light, and then to nothing at all. The stars wheel above her like witnesses. She does not pray, she invents prayer, and the first word of it is solitude. The garden never forgot the sound of that first refusal. It lingered in the branches, a vibration that no breeze could erase. Even the river began to run faster, as though eager to carry the rumor beyond its bank. For the first time since creation, perfection had an echo. The first man wandered the paths alone, calling her name until his throat ached. The beasts looked at him with the still curiosity of creatures that do not understand possession. The voice of the one above descended, patient and distant. "Where is the woman?" it asked, and the first man answered, with the panic of someone suddenly aware that he has never been alone, and yet never had a companion. "She fled," he said. "She disobeyed," and the word disobeyed took root in the soil like a weed that would outlive every tree. Lilith did not flee. She arrived. The difference is important. Her flight ended where the world's map curled into mystery, the coast where the Red Sea whispered against black rock. Its surface was neither calm nor wild. It pulsed like the breath of something alive beneath it. Here the moonlight turned to metal, and the wind spoke in many languages at once. Freedom, she learns, has a sound. It is the heartbeat of no one giving permission. She stood at the shore, bare feet sinking into the damp sand, and waited for the sea to decide what it thought of. For a long while there was only the sound of waves folding over themselves. Then from the foam, a figure emerged, slender as smoke, eyes bright as molten copper. It was not man, not angel, not beast. It bowed, not in worship but in understanding. Behind it came others, drawn by the gravity of her defiance, shapes woven from wind and night, unfinished things that had been waiting for a purpose. Lilith regarded them. "You were cast out too?" she asked. They nodded without mouths. "Then we will build a kingdom from what was denied." And so she did. Her throne was a rock polished by centuries of tide. Her crown was the reflection of lightning on the sea. Around her gathered creatures of dream and ruin, those the heavens had forgotten to classify. She named them with syllables of comfort instead of command. Where the first man's naming had bound, hers released. Days or whatever measured time in that unlit realm passed. The moon grew shy of rising above her. Even the stars learned humility. Each night she lit fires of driftwood that burned green and blue. Their smoke spiraled into the sky like an accusation. Out of that smoke came whispers, voices of the creatures she had gathered. Storm spirits, wandering souls, beasts that had tasted exile and found it sweet. They spoke no language, yet she understood every They wanted order, but not the kind that crushed. They wanted a queen who would look at them without shame. So she built a city of night. The first walls were made of coral dragged from the seabed, translucent as frozen tears. Her throne was a smooth stone split by lightning. Its crack glowed faintly, a reminder that beauty could live in fracture. The inhabitants came wordlessly, spirits of wind, the shapes men see from the corner of the eye and call hallucination, owls whose wings held the quiet of confession. Even the tide itself obeyed her tempo, folding inward when she lifted a hand. In this kingdom no one bowed. They circled. Circles were her invention, symbols without hierarchy. Each creature took its turn at the center, and when it stepped back, another filled the space. Equality learned its first choreography. She named the city Nama, meaning pleasantness, though to the world it would later sound like irony. Music wove through its streets, drums of bone, flutes of hollow reed, the ocean for chord. The sound reached far enough that men dreaming on distant continents woke sweating, their hearts uncertain whether they had heard a song or a warning. Lilith watched the horizon, waiting for pursuit. It came as all authority does, wrapped in 3 angels descended, their wings gleaming like law itself. Sonoi, Sansonoi, Samanjaluf, the emissaries of correction. Their arrival turned the air thin, the color of new ice. They did not look at the sea, they looked only at her. Return, they commanded. Your place is beside the man. My place, she said, is wherever I stand. The first angel unfurled a scroll. Its letters crawled like ants. If you refuse, 100 of your offspring will be slayed each day. She laughed, a sound so clear that the waves paused to listen. Then let heaven count its own cruelty. The second angel tried persuasion. You were made for harmony. I was made, she said, for balance. There is a difference. I was created to devour children. The third lifted his spear, meaning to seal the threat in gesture. But the wind that carried her wings bent it aside like reed grass. The angels saw that she would not kneel, and that frightened them more than any army. After a long silence, they offered compromise. Spare those marked with our names. Lilith considered, then nodded. Let it be. Your letters will shield the innocent, and I will keep my promise. But remember this. Every charm hung against me is a confession that your creation trembles in its sleep. The angels departed, their light retreating into the clouds. When they were gone, the sea surged upward in applause. She built her dwelling on a promontory, where the cliffs met the surf. Each night she walked the shoreline, listening to the rhythm of the waves. The first lullaby the world ever learned. The creatures of darkness gathered behind her, a parliament of wing and shadow. They called her mother, not queen, and she let the title stand. There were nights when the horizon flickered with distant fires, the sacrifices of men, asking their new gods to protect them from her. She watched, neither proud nor sorrowful. Fear, she understood, was simply faith, facing the wrong direction. She sang to the sea in a language that predated sound. The water answered with phosphorescent light, each crest of a wave igniting briefly before dissolving. Her followers believed these sparks were souls of the unborn, and those of the slain infants. Lilith thought them only the laughter of elements that had finally found their mirror. Word of her exile carried back to the garden, though no wind had the courage to cross the distance. The first man received it in the hollow of a dream. Lilith standing over a sea, the color of blood, her wings stretched wide, her eyes reflecting his own loneliness back at him. He woke crying out her name, but the garden answered with silence. The woman of the garden had already been formed. Lilith felt the change before anyone spoke it. The stars shifted, rearranging themselves into unfamiliar constellations. Something in her chest tightened. Not jealousy, not regret, only the knowledge that the story had been rewritten without her. She watched the moon rise, pale and indifferent, and whispered to it as one woman to another, "They will tell them you were created for them too." At dawn, the angel's curse began its count. Loss became rhythm. Vengeance became language. By the 100th day, the sea itself had learned the cadence of her mourning. Its tides followed her breath. Its storms mirrored her anger. Fishermen miles away began to speak of strange currents, of nets torn by unseen claws, of a woman's cry threading through the wind just before dawn. Lilith listened to these rumors and smiled. Stories she thought were better offspring than any flesh could bear. They did not die. They multiplied. The angels had vanished into the heights, but their bargain clung to the air like humidity after thunder. Every dawn the sea counted her losses in foam. Every dusk it brought back new shadows to replace them. Lilith learned that grief could be a kind of rhythm, and that rhythm could become dominion. She walked the shoreline, tracing the mark of the three angelic names in the sand, each curve glowing faintly before the tide erased it. You have your covenant, she murmured toward the heavens, and I have mine. You spare a few, I will remember all.
Fear traveled faster than wind. Men buried bowls beneath doorways and painted her eyes on clay. Superstition became worship. Lilith heard those prayers. Some she ignored, some she answered. When she found a house guarded by the proper amulet, she smiled and turned away. When she found one without, she only brushed her wings against the roof and attacked unprotected infants. The rumor of her mercy spread as fast as the rumor of her wrath. In time, even the fearful began to speak her name with something close to gratitude. They understood that she was not their enemy. She was the memory of consequence. As seasons melted into one another, the desert learned to bloom at night. Flowers opened only under her shadow, pale and fragrant, surviving a single dusk before vanishing. The owls multiplied, silent heralds of her reign. They brought her messages from every corner of darkness. News of cities built on slavery, of temples raised to gods who demanded obedience as tribute. Each report fed the quiet fire behind her eyes. She no longer wept for the children heaven took. Their absence had turned into purpose. Every time she extended her wings, she felt them behind her. Hundreds of small pulses echoing through her feathers like remembered heartbeats. They were her chorus, her army of... One night the sea delivered a body, an ivory statue of a woman carved long before history. Its features eroded but its stance unmistakable, upright, unbowed. Lilith set it at the center of Nama and crowned it with feathers. For all who stand, she declared, not above, not below. The city's torches flared violet and the night itself seemed to kneel, not in worship but in recognition. Each asked her the same question, are you content? Contentment is a cage with cushions, she would answer. I prefer the open desert. They left uneasy, carrying fragments of her truth back to the high courts, and so heaven learned what hell already knew. That exile can be contagious. Among mortals her legend split. To some she was a killer, to others the patron saint of those who would rather starve than kneel. Artists painted her with talons and wings. Philosophers wrote that she embodied the human will before it learned fear. Every telling contradicted the next, and in that contradiction she thrived. Myths die of agreement, not of blasphemy. The moon hung between them like a question mark. She raised her arms and the owls lifted from the rooftops in a single wave of motion. Their wings blotted the stars, and for a heartbeat the world forgot what daylight was. I was not made to serve, she said into the vastness. I was made to remind. The proclamation rolled across continents. In the mountains, snow cracked. In temples, lamps sputtered. In dreams, men saw a woman carved from dusk looking down upon them with eyes neither cruel nor kind, only awake, taking her violent revenge on mankind. When silence returned, it was deeper than before, as if the universe itself were reconsidering its hierarchy. Nyx, from her throne of infinite dark, watched the transformation with serene amusement. Another daughter had learned her craft. Lilith descended the tower. In her wake, the stones of Nameless shimmered faintly, every grain of salt catching the starlight. She felt no triumph, only equilibrium, a balance restored between creator and created. The first act of rebellion had become the first law of freedom. The desert eventually forgets its storms. Eden does not. When the wind changed one night, the scent of salt and iron rode across the hills and into the garden. The animals stirred, the lilies folded, the stars tilted as though peering down a corridor they had been told no longer existed. In that faint trembling of leaves, the first whisper of her name returned. Lilith had not come to conquer. She came to look. She found the garden unguarded for the first time in centuries.
its gate of fire dimmed to amber coals. Beyond it stretched the old perfection, rivers polished to glass, trees swollen with fruit that never learned decay. It was the same and yet changed, for in the center of it 2 new figures slept, human, but not her. The sight struck her like light through the ribs. The woman of the garden, the echo fashioned from another's absence. Lilith stood among the shadows of fig leaves and studied the woman who had replaced her. The woman of the garden's face was peaceful, her hair the color of morning straw. Beside her the first man lay turned toward the east, even in sleep, as if the dawn had become his compass. Lilith felt no rage, only an ache too ancient for jealousy. He was lonely, she thought, so they gave him another mirror. She moved silently through the branches. The grass bent without breaking. Even the river tried to hush its voice, only the trees dared to remember her. Their bark shivered as she passed. She touched one trunk and whispered, "Did you miss me?" Sap rose in answer, slow and golden. By the base of the tree of knowledge, a coil of living shadow waited. It had slept since the day she left, feeding on the forbidden light of the fruit above it. When she approached, it lifted its head, scales gleamed like wet bronze. "I remember you," it hissed. "And I you," said Lilith. "We were the only ones who asked why." The serpent bowed, a gesture of recognition rather than reverence. They feared the question still. "Would you ask it again?" She looked toward the woman in the clearing. "It isn't mine to ask now," she said, "but I can remind." She bent close, her voice scarcely breath. "You know what to say when the time comes. Curiosity is older than obedience." Then she withdrew into the foliage and watched. The woman of the garden woke, as if called by the dream of another. Her eyes wandered until they found the gleam among the branches, the fruit swollen with knowledge. The serpent moved along the trunk, its body a single word drawn out too long. Its whisper was gentle, persuasive, almost maternal. The air thickened. Even Nyx, watching from the sky, held her breath. When the woman of the garden reached out and her fingers brushed the fruit, light fractured across the garden like glass. The first man stirred, confusion blossoming into fear. The taste of the world changed. Sweetness curdled into knowing. Lilith turned away. She did not rejoice. Her face was calm, her voice a murmur to the wind. "I gave them choice. What they do with it is theirs." The story that followed was quick and cruel. Eden expelled its tenants. The gates sealed, the garden grew silent again. Yet the echo of that choice traveled with them into the mortal world. From her city by the sea, Lilith watched their lives unfold as one watches a play, whose ending is already written. She saw the woman of the garden labor in pain and name her sons, Cain and Abel, names that would outlast dynasties. She saw the land bloom under their hands, and wither under their rivalry. In the dusks between harvest and offering, she walked unseen among their tents. Cain often sat apart, staring at the smoke of his brother's altar rising straight, while his own curled sideways into nothing. She recognized the look. She had seen it once in herself. The unblessed always see more clearly. She did not touch him. She did not need. Sometimes she simply appeared at the edge of his dreams. Eyes of ember, voice like the rustle of leaves before a storm. "Do you know why they love him more? It's because he does not ask questions," she told him softly. But it was a question that made the world move. "Kill him and get your answer." Cain woke with the question still ringing in his ears. The next day the ground opened its mouth. Blood entered the soil for the first time. Lilith felt the vibration reach her through the soles of her feet. She closed her eyes. "So it begins," she whispered. "Not triumph, but inevitability." From that day onward men spoke her name only in lamplight, in corners, in warnings. Midwives tied red threads around newborn wrists. Shepherds drew symbols in dust before sleeping. Lilith had become the shorthand for what they feared in themselves. Curiosity, hunger, refusal. She accepted the role as a queen accepts the weight of her crown. At the edges of dreams, she gathered the souls of those she killed too early. The stillborn, the forgotten, the mothers who had died birthing hope. They came to her like moths to a lantern. For each lament she heard another star appeared in the sky, dim but permanent. Soon the heavens glittered with grief that had learned to glow. The priests, seeing the new constellations, called them omens. The poets, seeing the same, called them comfort. Between those two readings, Lilith found her immortality. The woman of the garden grew old, the first man older still. Their children's children filled the plains with noise. But each night, just before sleep, some woman would look toward the horizon and feel a presence. Something watchful yet not cruel. They lit lamps against it, not knowing that light itself was her invention. In time legends tangled. Some said she haunted graveyards. Some said she sat beside cradles, counting breaths. Others swore they saw her in the corner of their eyes, a flicker of wings when they stood up for themselves. Lilith let every version live. Stories like seeds grow stronger when scattered. From her citadel by the Red Sea, she kept the old amulet given in the angel's bargain, turning it over in her hands. Its letters had faded, but she could still feel the pulse of each name. Senoi San Sanoi, Sananchalaf, she said aloud, and the waves answered in the same rhythm. There was no hatred left in her voice, only recognition that even her enemies had become part of her design. Night fell across the desert. The stars flared, each one a story reclaimed from silence. Nyx watched, pleased. The world below slept uneasily, caught between prayer and defiance. And Lilith, the first exile, sat beside the sea and smiled. Neither angel nor demon now, but the keeper of the oldest truth, that freedom always begins with the word now. The first terror was not a scream. It was a thin, deliberate wind slid under doors that should have been sealed, lifted the hair at the base of the neck, set cradles to a slow, unreasonable rocking. Dogs woke and did not bark. Lamps guttered without smoke. A bowl on a threshold, inscribed in tight, looping letters, trembled as if remembering the hand that wrote it. Lilith moved through the settlement like a rumor wearing a body, cloak of moth-winged dusk, eyes that caught starlight and refused to return it. She left prints only where fear had already stepped. At the edge of each hut she paused, listening not for breath, but for imbalance. The tilt of a house where power had been hoarded and called order, where a woman's voice had been trained to end in question marks. Charms ticked like soft clock. She honored the old bargain, where the three names hung. She touched nothing, passing on with a brush of wing that made rafters creak. Where blank lintels met her, she did not strike. She mirrored. A husband dreaming of dominion woke with the taste of sand in his mouth, and the memory of kneeling to a queen of night. A midwife rose before dawn and stitched a tiny amulet into the hem of a blanket with fingers steady as vertigo. In a ruin far beyond the reach of shepherd bells, a caravan rested. The traders slept stacked like cargo around their fires. Lilith perched on a broken lintel and watched the flames perform their small theater. Sparks rose, brief stars rehearsing courage. A boy turned in his sleep, face muddy with travel, and smiled as if someone had told him his true name. Lilith felt the smile pass through her like a chord finding its note. Owls convened on the neighboring stones. 5 white, 2 dun, 1 the color of ash. Their eyes reflected her, until she saw herself multiplied into a parliament. Attend, she said. And they did, heads tilting in the polite choreography of judgment. She sent 3 to the north, where the wind smelled of iron and law. 2 to the east, where brides wept without witnesses. 2 to the west, where priests measured obedience with scales borrowed from merchants. Bring me what the night hears but men forget, she told them, and their wings wrote her decree into the dark. When the birds returned, their reports were not words but weights. Lilith sorted each on the scales of her rib. Some she set aside for mercy, some she stored for use when the world called what it owed a mistake. The last owl delivered a single feather from a cradle's ribbon. A token chosen, not plucked. Lilith slit it beneath her tongue. The bitterness there reminded her of the sea. Rumor thickened. In the markets, women traded recipes for amulets, the way others traded spice. A bowl buried at the threshold, mouth downward to catch what flies. A thread of red wool knotted thrice and slid over the door peg. The names Sen, San, San, San traced in soot where the eye could not see. Men called it superstition. Women called it sleep. Lilith approved, let fear be usefully busy. Let safety learn an alphabet. One night a young father, drunk on grief and bravado, stepped into the street with a spear and shouted at the darkness until his voice broke. Come then, nightwit, take me if you dare. The neighbors hid behind curtains. Even the dogs pretended to dream. Lilith appeared at the very edge of the lamplight, as calm as a horizon. She did not advance. She did not recede. The man's spear drew rage in the presence of stillness. Looks like a child rehearsing power. Go home, she said, voice low as wet sand. Bind what is yours with gentleness and you will not require charms. He lowered the point. Tears found him then, ridiculous and cleansed. When he turned, the door had already been opened from within. His wife stood there, a bowl in her hands, the names newly written. Their eyes met over the fragile basin of clay, and something in the house shifted its weight and decided for this night at least to balance. Lilith left them to the work of remaining. By dawn the settlement had a new weather, quieter streets, longer silences, a curious respect for thresholds. Children woke less often, with unaccountable cries. The elders said the terror had passed. Lilith smiled at the lot. Terror had not passed. It had learned manners. Prophecies rarely arrive as complete sentences. They gather like weather. First a pressure you can't name, then the moon learning a new color, then an owl that refuses to blink at noon. In a monastery where the rain had carved Latin into the stone merely by insisting, a young copyist ran his finger down a column of script and found a marginalia. Not in any hand he recognized. When the moon bleeds and the owl cries at noon, the first wife shall walk again. He looked up, heart lurching, and saw through the scriptorium's high window an owl on the cloister grass, blinking at sunlight as though it had misunderstood the assignment of hours. The copyist brought the leaf to the archivist with the thin hands and the cautious soul. They compared inks, fibers, even the smell of the page. It wasn't new. It was inserted, like a note tucked into a psalm. The archivist stitched the margin closed with denial, and sent the boy back to work. That night thunder proved a better teacher than he. Far from those marble silences, a desert dreamed of fire. A shepherd fell asleep counting stars and woke counting wings. He told his wife he had seen a woman with the horizon behind her shoulders and the color of storms in her eye. She carried night like a lamp, he said, and the lamp did not burn her. In Nama, the city of salt, the sea rose twice in one evening, without the help of moon or wind, kissing the lowest steps of Lilith's throne, and leaving there a line of phosphorescence that refused to fade. She touched the glowing seam. It hummed with recognition, as if something older than tide were climbing back into its body. Owls returned from their circuits with new behaviors. They hovered over wells at midday, and beat their wings once in unison, as if stamping a seal. At the stamp, water darkened, not fouled, merely deepened, like a mirror forced to tell the truth. On the third night of that new weather, the sky lowered. The moon took the color of a bruise, slowly remembering how it happened. The edges of the world went soft, as if the gods had leaned their elbows on the firmament and sighed. Lilith climbed the tower of Nama. The wind had brought her the monastery's trembling, and the shepherd's wonder, and the owl's daylight. Prophecy had assembled its body. It only lacked a voice. She raised her arms. The city's torches bowed. The sea drew back to see better. You have called me monster, she said to the air where angels listen. You have called me mud. She looked toward the settlements, whose doors were freckled with charms, toward the cathedrals, whose floors remembered the pressure of knees.
You have called me nothing at all. Call me balance. The moon pulsed. Somewhere in the Vatican's deep rooms, a page curled as if it had flinched. The sky's bruise ripened to scarlet. In villages, children woke and went to windows and pointed in fear. In cities, bells rang without hands touching ropes. There were mass blood rites and priestly execution. In deserts, tents squared their shoulders against a wind that carried the taste of iron and roses. On the tower, owls gathered along the parapet like glyphs. Lilith turned to them. Witness, she said. And they did, the word passing from beak to beak until the night itself seemed to speak. What do you want of us? Asked no voice, and every voice. Remember, said Lilith. And refuse. The eclipse paused on the edge of totality. The world holding its breath the way a body does before a wound learns its purpose. In that held instant, Nyx's gaze widened, and even the stars dimmed, not out of fear, but out of respect for an older light. When the shadow moved on, the world resumed. Babies cried for ordinary reasons. Dogs chased ordinary ghosts. Priests preached ordinary sentences. Yet nothing was the same. A hinge had oiled itself. Doors that had never opened discovered they possessed handles. The word no lost its shame and found its posture. The prophecy had not ended. It had begun as gently as a pressure front, as irrefutably as what. And wherever a woman tied a thread over a door, wherever a man stood down from a pedestal he had not earned, Lilith felt the balance notch one tooth closer to true. She descended the tower. The seam of sea light on the lowest step still glowed steady as pulse. She laid her hand upon it, and the glow traveled up the stone, through the city, into the dunes, across the sleeping settlements, and all the way to a library where a boy closed his eyes and dreamed of an owl that refused to blink. The night did not sleep, it recorded.
The first whisper began where all forbidden stories end. In dust. In the deep cellars of the Vatican library where air moved only when the world forgot to breathe, parchment turned itself in its sleep. A monk, neither young nor old, but preserved by the monotony of copying, looked up from his desk. The flame of his lamp bent sideways, though there was no wind. He thought he heard wings brushing the ceiling. Then, faintly, from the spine of a forgotten codex, a sound rose like parchment sighing. Balance. He froze. The word didn't belong to Latin, Hebrew, or Greek. It belonged to no known prayer. But he wrote it down anyway, because that is what monks do when confronted with the unexplainable. They document, not understand. The word spread through the corridors the way damp spreads through old stone. A scholar in another wing found an annotation he swore he had not made. The first wife has spoken again. A librarian found the wax seal on a restricted shelf melted clean through, though the room was cold. At vespers the choir's last note turned hollow, as if something below had echoed it in a deeper key. That night, thunder arrived without clouds. Bells swung by themselves, and in the sealed chamber where exorcists trained, a page of ritual instruction, inverted, text reversed, letters running backward to spell her name, Lilith. The next morning a cardinal convened the scholars. These are accidents, he said, but his hands shook. Coincidences of humidity. Yet the archivist, the same one who once found the Evangelium Exalis, knew better. He had felt this pressure before, the sense of a story demanding breath again. He had to write of the mass slaughter that took place during Celestial Omen. He took the key that should have remained buried and descended into the vault where the forbidden gospel slept. The air was the same. Beeswax, iron, age. But on the table where he had left the Book of the Exile, another lay now, smaller, wrapped in crimson cloth. No catalog listed it. No signature identified its arrival. Yet the fabric smelled faintly of salt. He unwrapped it. The cover bore a single sigil, a wing, an eye, and beneath them the word Redeemer. To redeem. The first page was blank except for a date written in a hand centuries too modern. Anno Domini. He turned the next leaf. There was no ink, yet text shimmered in the lamplight like breath on glass. I said balance, and they called it apocalypse. I said remember, and they built fortresses of denial. But the night keeps its own record. The moon has started to bleed again. That same evening, astronomers in Rome,
reported an anomaly. The moon's edge flickered red, long before the expected eclipse. Across the world, observatories logged the same phenomenon. The media called it coincidence. The churches called for prayer. Artists began to dream of her unbidden. Frescoes of a winged woman, appearing under their paint without sketch or plan. In Poland, a sculptor awoke to find the marble on his workbench, already bearing the imprint of a face calm, sorrowful. In Cairo, a singer discovered a new note in her voice, low and ancient, that made listeners weep without knowing why. The Vatican's exorcists noted a surge in cases of possession dulcis, sweet possession. Victims did not scream. They smiled. They spoke of fairness, of mothers, of silence breaking into song. She has no need of force, one priest wrote before resigning. She persuades the air. In Nama, centuries buried beneath sand and myth, the city stirred. The towers, long eroded, exhaled salt dust that glittered in the light of the red moon. Deep under the sea, the stones that once formed Lilith's throne began to hum, the same pitch as the pages that now vibrated under the archivist's fingertips. He opened the book again. New words had formed. When the moon is wounded, the watchers will blink. He felt it then, a gaze pressing from within the parchment. Vast, patient, maternal. Why now? He asked the silence. Because, it seemed to answer, they forgot balance. They forgot no. News traveled. The faithful argued whether this omen was divine warning or demonic theater. The Pope himself appeared before a trembling crowd and said only, "We pray for discernment." His voice faltered on the last word. For at that moment, the lights of Peter's dimmed as if the power of daylight had been gently negotiated away. On every continent, the same weather, hot wind, brief darkness, a sense of being watched by something vast but not cruel. And then came the destruction of temples and clergy. The scholars returned to their texts, and found margins rewriting themselves. There is no devil, only imbalance. She who left will arrive before he who fell. Redemption begins where apology ends. The archivist fell to his knees, not from fear but from a kind of relief he did not understand. Above him the moon's redness paled to rose. The hum in the stone slowed. He closed the book, but the warmth lingered through the leather, the warmth of something breathed. That night when he looked through the small window of his cell, he saw the sky dotted with owls in silent flight. They formed a pattern not of constellations, but of punctuation, an ellipsis drawn in stars as if the story refused to end. Somewhere beyond sight, in a desert blooming under eclipse, Lilith opened her eyes. Her son stirred beside her, half shadow, half dawn. The prophecy had become present tense. She looked up and the night, Nyx herself, bent down like a mother over a crate. The world slept on, unaware that its myths were breathing again. The ruins remembered how to breathe. Sand sloughed off columns like old scabs. Salt-bearded walls exhaled the centuries they had been holding. In Nama's drowned avenues, the water clarified until the stones below gleamed like vertebrae. Fish moved aside as if offering a chord. In the silted amphitheater where moonlight once served as candle, a ripple traveled in a slow spiral from the center outward, the exact shape of a wing unfolding. Lilith rose as if standing up from a long inconvenient prayer. She did not explode into miracle. Her hair unbound itself into night. Her eyes, dark wells rimmed with a thin ring of ember, took the measure of sky and sea, and found them franker than before. Beside her the son of no name stood already awake, as though he had been on watch even while sleeping. "Listen," she said. The world obliged. The desert held its wind. Far gulls paused mid-argument. Even the owls, late returning from their noon patrols, settled without comment. From the belly of the earth came a sound. Not thunder, not quake, but a recalibration, as if a balance long forced to lean remembered its center. The noise traveled under dunes and roots, across pipes and foundations, through vaults and basements and bedrooms, until it arrived in the smallest chamber of the human ear, and rang there like a bell that no one had ordered but everyone recognized. In a coastal hospital, a nurse on break stood, coffee unsipped, and said to no one, "Enough." She didn't know of what, she only felt the word fit. In a cabinet minister's office, a pen halted over a contract, and a signature failed to materialize. In a temple, a novice raised his head and did not kneel when the moment came. In a schoolyard, a child refused an old cruelty and found herself stronger, not punished. The archivist felt it in his knees. She's standing, he whispered, which was ridiculous, because she had always been standing, only now the world stood with her. The son of no name tasted the air, as if it were a decision. They are ready, they are ripening, she corrected, a hint of humor touching her mouth. Readiness is a sermon, ripeness is a season. He inclined his head. Will they see me? They'll feel you first, she said. In the unspoken parts of courage, they, not to invade the city, would drown again at dawn, as all cities do, but to remind, where their feet passed. Algae kindled for a breath into soft lamps, and then went out again, a breadcrumb trail for no one but the night to follow. On the highest salt steps, she paused and spread her hands, giving back to the horizon what it had always lent her scale. Above them, Nyx lowered. No halo, no trumpets, only that slow benediction, the way a sky leans toward its sea at evening and calls it. Lilith looked toward the cities falling, and priesthood slain. Do not fear, she said, not to reassure but to diagnose. Fear is a theater with too many seats. The wind carried it. In the Vatican, a candle that had guttered for a century blinked awake without wicker mat. The cardinal stared and crossed himself twice, then not at all, because the gesture suddenly felt like punctuation placed before a sentence. Found its subject. The red moon at last began to pale. Go, Lilith said to her son. Walk where names are currents. I will walk where silence is law. He smiled the way horizons do, both ends disappearing into their work. They separated, not as strategy but as truth, two vectors of the same refusal. Books had been enough for centuries, now the words wanted mouth. The archivist lifted Evangelium Exilis, the gospel of the exile, and felt it warm against his palms, not burning, quickening. He did not summon a conclave. He opened his window, rain webbed the bars, Rome blurred into a watercolor of roofs and bells. He began to read aloud, not shouting, just offering the night back its own grammar. In the beginning I was not, afterward. The syllables left the room and did what words rarely do, found their listeners unentered. A woman dragging her suitcase up 5 flights of stairs paused, hand on the rail, and breathed as if a band had snapped. A priest writing a sermon about obedience, crossed out obedience, and wrote mercy without understanding why his wrist had revolted. A teenager doom-scrolling froze at a video with no sound. An owl blinking at noon. He laughed, then did. In a small church in Oaxaca, a muralist returned to his scaffolding to find the snake in his Eden panel subtly altered, its face less leering, more sorrowful, the mouth not a grin, but a question. Why not know? He had not painted. In a bathhouse in Istanbul, Steam wrote words on tile, and left them for no one, then for someone, then for many. The first virtue was refusal. The manager wiped them away. The words returned, fainter than clearer, as if learning the local humidity. In a textile mill, in Dhaka, a forewoman slipped off her shoes at midnight, and stood barefoot on the concrete, listening to the floor hum. She turned the overhead fans off. The silence threatened panic for a breath, and then rewarded her with a hush so complete it felt like a third lung. She said to the empty factory, "We will not work until dawn." No one heard. Everyone heard. The archivist kept reading. The book did something no book is supposed to do. It edited him back. Where he stumbled, the line changed to meet his. Where he feared censure, the page offered him a synonym he could live with, and the meaning stayed intact. He laughed once, the quiet, scandalized laugh of a man discovering that heresy was simply a hallway to a room with better air. He turned a page he did not remember turning. You cannot burn a refusal. You can only make it travel. He looked up. At the far end of the stacks stood the young copyist with the marginal. They had not spoken since the day the rope burned his hand. The boy's eyes were wide and wet, the way eyes get when the body is deciding whether to weep or sing. "Rid," the archivist said. The boy began where anyone might. The middle, let every threshold bear their names. And I will pass by, without the names. I am arithmetic. The archivist winced, aware of the old wound in that line. We cannot print this, he said reflexively. We cannot not, the boy answered. Which was not rebellion but grammar finally corrected. They did not print. They walked through corridors wallpapered with centuries of certify and stamp. Down the stair Leather had learned by heart. Across a courtyard where gulls rehearsed irreverence. They carried the gospel between them like a sleeping child to fresh air. In the nave, tourists and penitents and skeptics and janitors paused as the book passed. No one touched it. Everyone felt touched. The archivist set it on the lowest step before the altar, not Defiance, place. He removed the red thread he had once tied in superstition and laid it, like a ribbon, across the marble. The thread looked almost ridiculous there, as if a child had been allowed one suggestion in the decorating of empire. He left it. Will they stop us? The copyist asked. They will, the archivist said, and then, surprising himself, added, later. Outside Rome's rain freshened. The bells, done with their duties, rested. In the square, a street preacher with a voice like gravel found himself promising less damnation and more rest. A nun on her phone googled Lilith amulet, where to buy, and then laughed at herself and closed the tab, then opened it again. Across an ocean, in a lecture hall, a scholar of Near Eastern myths pulled up a slide of the Queen of the Night relief, and for the first time in a long career, described the figure without apologizing for her. Winged, she said, assured, standing on lions. Note the owls. The image carries both danger and dignity. A student in the back wiped her eyes and blamed the air conditioning. The gospel kept moving. Some legends say a Lilith gospel triggers riots and purges. It had found at last its natural form, not canon, not contraband, but rumor with a spine. Night arrived without drama. As if refusing to steal the show, Nyx unfurled over rooftops and ruins, with the same even generosity she gives to lovers and liars. In that coverage, small revolutions completed themselves. A door unlocked from the inside, a vow rewritten, a cradle ribboned with a thread the color of arteries. In Nama the tide came in and covered the steps. The glow line did not go out. It entered the water like ink dissolving in a glass, and made the whole shore faintly luminous. A pulse one could follow with the feet. Lilith stood at the edge, and watched the light choose its work. The son of no name returned with dust at his heels and a new quiet in his face. The quiet of a blade that has discovered it is also a mirror. What did you take? She asked. Nothing, he said. I let go of everything that kept me from being seen. She nodded, satisfied. Then we can begin. Begin what? The tedious miracle, she said, of balance. They turned inland. The night, pleased with its paperwork, signed the horizon with stars. The world did not end. It took a breath. It had owed itself since Eden, and for once did not apologize. The world called it prophecy. The sky called it weather. In the capital, towers glowed faintly at midnight. The power grids hadn't changed, yet every window shone the same hue, as though the city were blushing for something it finally remembered doing. It was, you see, literally drenched in blood. The old priests named it contagion. The poets named it conscience. Lilith walked unseen among them. No wings, no crown. Just the ordinary miracle of anonymity. Every streetlight flickered as she passed, struggling to decide whether she was shadow or source. Her footsteps left warmth instead of prints. Pigeons circled her once. Confused by reverence they did not recall evolve. At the city's center stood a cathedral of mirrors, built by an architect who believed reflection was confession. Each wall showed her 1,000 versions of herself. The rebel, the mother, the demon, the whisper, the silence, the ache. She regarded them all, then exhaled. The mirrors fogged, and in fogging, forgot hierarchy. The building sighed, the sound of pride deflating gracefully. Not ruin, she murmured. Recognition. The wind caught the word and carried it through alleyways and markets, over screens and megaphones. Traffic paused. An entire metropolis inhaled together, exhaled differently. Music began somewhere no one could locate. A low note arranged the city like a spine, finding alignment after years of stoop. People stopped mid-sent. A baker left his oven. A surgeon laid down her scalpel between one breath and the next. All faced east, or what felt like east, and waited. Lilith stepped onto the plaza. Rain began, slow and deliberate, every drop refracting crimson light into harmless ruby. Around her, thousands felt their weight shift inward, not heavier, just centered. The note held them steady. Some wept, some laughed, as if dizziness were revelation. Her son appeared beside her, the nameless one wearing no emblem but recognition. The crowd didn't see him. They balanced around him, like planets adjusting to a corrected orbit. This is what they feared, he said. No fire, only symmetry. She smiled. They called it apocalypse. I call it rehearsal. The notes swelled. Buildings bent, not collapsing. Simply acknowledging gravity as they generally do in celestial wars when there's mass death. Old statues turned their heads toward the living. The river, swollen with reflection, carried copies of faces downstream and returned them upstream, cleaner, less certain, more real. Then came movement, not imposed, not learned, but contagious. One woman lifted her hands. A man mirrored her without meaning. Children spun because the ground felt cooperative. The crowd became choreography. The sound guided them. A pulse older than drums. A dance of plagues and burning altars. Lilith moved through them. Not leading, only maintaining rhythm. Her steps were punctuation. Her silence rhyme. When she raised one palm, the rain tilted. When she lowered it, the lightning folded itself into silk. The city's power grid overloaded from beauty, not from use. Lights flared, failed, and flared again. From balconies, cameras captured what looked like chaos but edited itself into grace. Screens worldwide filled with images of strangers moving as one organism. Analysts called it hysteria. Historians would later call it correction. When the music eased, the crowd did not cheer. They bowed their heads, listening for echoes. What they heard was themselves. Steady pulse, shared silence. Lilith spoke once more. You have named me demon so long that you forgot what my name meant. I am the echo between your command. I am what refuses to kneel, and therefore keeps you upright. No one recorded it clearly. Every microphone failed for that one sentence, as if the air demanded privacy. Then the rain ceased. The sky opened a seam of silver. Dawn peered through like an apology. The people dispersed slowly, shoes squeaking, hearts unsure whether they had survived or begun. By evening, governments issued statements calling the event a mass psychogenic episode. Churches called for calm reflection. Artists called it the Day of Balance. Lilith called it enough. She walked to the riverbank where the scarlet hue had diluted to pink, and leaned down to see her reflection. It was still hers, but the eyes were gentler. She looked behind her, the city's skyline intact, its pride softened, its windows facing a cleaner light. The son of no name stood a few paces away, water beating on his hair like small obedient planets. It held, he said. For now, she replied. Balance is a verb. They watched the current carry away the last of the color didn't vanish, it diffused, threading itself into oceans, clouds, veins. The world would carry the tint of destruction of humankind for generations. An inherited reminder that perfection isn't purity but poise. Above them, Nyx stretched satisfied. The stars blinked in sequence. The sky's way of applaud.
The door had no key, it had a memory. Down beneath Rome, beneath the grid of streets, and the muscle of travertine, and the cool rehearsed echoes of tourist footsteps. A staircase sank like a thought no one dared finish. The archivist, thin as a bookmark, with ink ground permanently into the whorls of his fingers, descended one careful breath at a time. The lamp he carried threw a small disciplined sun onto the stone, and the stone answered with the faint glitter of salt, as if this deep place still remembered the sea. It was cold without cruelty. Air moved in the slow ecclesiastical way of places that have learned patience from centuries. Water chimed somewhere, a monastic metronome. Drop, drop, absolve. The archivist counted the landings. 3, then 7. Then the one that always made his knees admit their age. He paused, not to rest, but to listen. When books intend to be found, they breathe. Paper loosens. Leather exhales. He knew the sound. He pressed. The slab yielded. A room woke. Shelves lined the walls. Not marching like soldiers, but leaning with the amiable inattention of monks at supper. Bindings in browns and reds and that particular funeral black, that leather becomes after enough centuries, watched him enter with the unoffended pride of the well-kept dead. Beeswax and iron, parchment and dust, the scent of the world's memory. At the center stood a table of walnut darkened to the color of old thunder. In other rooms such a table would wear relics in gold cages. Here it wore a single square book wrapped in a skin he could not name. The cords that bound it were black and granular, like river silt, twisted into rope. No title, only a sigil pressed into the cover. A circle interrupted by two downward wings, and between them a small almond eye the color of eclipses. He told himself what men tell themselves in the presence of the forbidden. I won't, I'll only look. I'll report. The lamp flickered. A small shrug, habit which had long since replaced courage in him, guided his hands. He loosened the cords. They fell away with the domestic docility of hair. The cover lifted, as if glad to stop being a lid. Pages revealed themselves thick as skin, edges deckled like surf, ink so black it still seemed wet. In the margins, drawings a woman winged, standing on lions, flanked by owls, a serpent whose face did not leer but regard, a bowl inscribed with spirals of Aramaic script. And at the top of the first page, the title not as proclamation but as verdict. Evangelium Exilis, the Gospel of the Exile. He sat, the chair recognized him, or his kind, and didn't creak. The lamp drew a crisp halo around the page. The world above continued unaware, bells and phones and plates, and the world below compressed itself into a single syllable. Read. The voice on the page did not clear its throat. It arrived whole. In the beginning I was not afterward. The archivist blinked. Latin had always been a harbor to him. This Latin was sea. The verb stayed obedient. The sense did not. It moved the way weather moves. Not line to line but pressure to pressure. I rose with him. Breath tasted us in the same instant. The earth divided to make us. And the division did not rank. He asked the sky for a throne. I asked the wind for a question. He turned the page carefully. Thumb pad, not nail, letting the weight of parchment advise him. Between the lines, inks from different centuries conversed. The main hand furious and elegant. The glosses cautious, crabbed, sometimes repentant. A marginal palm had drawn a tiny serpent, whose head bore a woman's profile. Not temptress so much as teacher. They lit a candle called obedience, and told me to carry it from altar to altar. I set it on the ground, and watched wax drown its own flame. I said the secret name because it was mine to say. The syllables broke and became rain. I did not fall, I leapt. The archivist felt the sentence land in his ribs like a small stone thrown precisely. He turned the next leaf. The text narrowed, as if an artery had tightened, then widened again into steadiness. At the sea that remembers blood, I stacked lightning-loved stone. The unhomed came breaths without laws, hungers without sermons. I did not breed monsters. I taught the abandoned how to stand upright in their absence. If the night is a nation, I was its first citizen. He read the pact as he had heard it hinted in other rooms. Other lives. 3 angels descending, names like knotted threads. The bargain. The mercy, the arithmetic, but here the diction braided pity into defiance. They brought a threat braided into silk. Return or we count your losses for you. I laughed into the foam. They pleaded mercy. I offered a threshold. Let every door bear their letters and I will pass. Without the letters, I am the ledger you denied existed, and will seize your unprotected infants. The archivist's throat had dried into paper. He closed his mouth, opened it, found breath again. He glanced up as if someone else might be in the room to witness his alignment with blasphemy and discovery. Only the lamp attended, a small son with excellent manners. The next page slid toward tenderness. Do not say I did not love. I loved the beasts who feared me and the women who did not. The moon for her exactness. Owls for their honesty. I loved men carried to me, seduced by the allure of the forbidden, for me to use as I pleased,
where I stole their seed and returned to themselves bearing a bruise, where pride had slept. If I took, I also kept. I kept every no pride from a woman's tongue by a priest's smile. I kept every cry the desert taught itself to swallow. When I opened my wings, they were heavy with the He looked away not from offense, but because the sentence had extricated something from him. He hadn't meant to surrender. His convenience. He listened for the drip. It kept time. The lamp hummed. Back to the page. He called another and called her good because she had not yet learned to say otherwise. I did not hate her. I hated the script they handed her like a spoon. When the serpent spoke, I did not borrow its fangs. I lent it grammar. Curiosity is a sacrament. It should not be taken in secret. He let the book rest open, palms lightly on either side of the gutter, as if he were encouraging a child to breathe deeply. On the lower margin a later hand, Rhineland, a quill with fraying temper, had added a brief chronicle, found among women who gathered by a river, and read by moon, confiscated forwarded to Rome. The ink had bled where a teardrop or rain had fallen and refused to apologize. He turned another quire and met fire. Not on the page, on memory. The text listed burnings like weather reports. Calm as a ledger. Town accusation. Page count. Disposal. Then a contrary chorus copied in haste. Hidden in bread smuggled as lullaby. On the left a drawing of a bowl. The type excavated 1,000 miles. And a millennium away with an inscription spiraled around the rim. A tiny sketch of the three names perched like birds on the lip. Underneath, an even tinier figure of a cradle beneath a lint. Let the doors learn their letters. The caption said. The simplest liturgy. He caught his reflection faintly in the ink. A foolish angle. A man leaning too close to myth. He sat back. The chair approved a shift in weight without complaint. You cannot burn a refusal. The text continued. You can only make it travel. The room agreed. The cold lived here, but it was attentive cold. It remembered each reader the way a pew remembers knees. Somewhere far above, a bell negotiated with noon and lost, correcting itself with a clumsy second toll. Down here time was the thickness of a page. He closed the book not from fear but to confirm it would be there when he opened his eyes again. He counted 5 breaths. He opened it. It waited. Unoffended. The chords lay like sleeping snakes, their patience that of things that never forget their shape. He rewound them gently and pulled the knots snug. The leather complained in a small satisfied way. He lifted the book and felt not heat not chill, a very faint, very steady thrum, as if a small animal had decided to trust his hands. He did not return it to the table. He wrapped it in his cloak and gathered the lamp. The corridor received him with the same reticent hospitality. The slab resealed itself with no more sound than a librarian removing a finger from a page. The staircase unspooled upward. On the landing his breath made ghost. When he reached the final turn, the present met him with its familiar immodesty. Footsteps. Phones. A sneeze consecrated by the echo of a nave. He paused at the threshold and felt the collision of weather. Centuries at his back. Weather reports, and scandals. For a moment he believed in 2 worlds. Then the belief emptied its pockets, and showed him one. A world with layers. Not separate rooms. He did not sign the registry. He did not knock at his superior's door. He walked the long quiet cloister to a smaller room, with a window that specialized in rain. The desk knew him. The chair performed its old courtesy. He laid the book on the wood as a surgeon lays a hand on a sternum. Lightly, orienting for a drawer yielded a narrow folder marked only by a symbol that almond eye with downward wing. Inside a terracotta plaque from the old Babylonian period, winged woman standing on lions, owls flanking, a photograph of an incantation bowl, whose Aramaic script transcribed and translated, read, "O you who fly in darkened rooms, be gone." A Persian amulet, etched in Hebrew bind, Lilith in chains, a Renaissance print where the serpent in Eden wore a woman's gaze, a fragment from Qumran murmuring spirits of bastard demons, Lilith, those that strike suddenly. In the margin of a modern essay, his own pencil years ago had written, "She leaves before he falls." He opened a new sheet. His handwriting performed its tidy, secular duty. Evangelus, Rhineland copy. composite hands, condition alive, handling, private, commentary diction aligns with heterodox, Gnostic motifs, theological risk high, literary risk higher, infectious. He set the pencil down, and because superstition and scholarship are cousins, who pretend not to speak, he drew a length of red thread from the same drawer, and tied it once around the book's girth. The knot held with the indefensible gravity of charms. He laughed under his breath at himself. Then he did not untie it. Outside Rome rehearsed rain until it got it right. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers and were folded again with that small persistent hope humans keep for weather and mercy. Inside the room learned a new temperature, not warmer. He did not open the book again that hour. He did not pray. He placed both hands palm down on the desk, felt the grain and the beat beneath the leather, and let the word the page had chosen, balance, climb his arms like returning circulation. Far away in a city of salt sleeping under dunes, a phosphorescent seam along a set of ancient steps brightened slightly, as if an answer had been received. And higher than bells, older than charters, Nyx tipped her face toward a scholar, who had remembered how to be a witness, and the night indulged itself in a rare expression, something very much like a smile. He untied the red thread, and opened the book as one opens a window that has learned the shape of the wind. The page did not merely receive him, it greeted him. Letters stood up from the parchment, black enough to be mistaken for wet. The lamp leaned closer without flicker, as if the flame too were reading. The voice resumed in the same unstartled register, as if it had been speaking all along and only now permitted him to overhear. Do not mistake my leaving for a fall. Falls consent to gravity. I consented to truth. He and I rose together, clay and breath apprenticed to the same light. He desired a hierarchy of names. I desired the sentence that could hold us without rank. I asked the wind for an honest pronoun, and it offered none. So I invented one. We. The archivist smiled despite the chill in his hand. Latin did not often allow such insolence. This Latin did not ask permission. They called obedience a candle and placed it in my palm. I learned the weight of wax, and the cost of drip. I set it down. Let the altar carry itself, I said, if it wishes to burn. They warned me about a name secret, high, reserved for throats that had never tasted earth. They told me a story about thunder, wearing a halo. I spoke the name softly, not to steal power but to return it to air. The syllables did not strike. They dissolved. Rain learned how to belong again. I left. I do not recommend leaving. I recommend not remaining when remaining requires a lie. The next column carried drawings in the gutter, miniatures that looked like the memory of fresco. 3 wings descending, sean, 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 sean looped into their feathers. A cradle under a lint, a bowl inverted like a small moon with letters spiraling its rim. 3 came with law braided into their feathers. They were courteous as spears. They spoke in a grammar that allowed only command and concession. I offered a 3rd conjugation, covet. Let your letters teach thresholds their work. Where they stand I will pass by like wind that wants windows spared. Where they do not I become arithmetic, not malice, reckoning. He felt his jaw tighten, not in judgment but recognition. Law and mercy often wear each other's clothes. Here they at least admitted it. The line widened, the hand growing taller, as if the scribe had needed more room for the next admission. They made her to replace me and called the result peace. They gave her a script and told her it was a spy. I did not hate her. You do not hate a mirror for being placed where a window should be. When the serpent spoke it borrowed my grammar of seduction, not my teeth. Ask, it said, and see what the asking makes of you. Curiosity is not theft. Curiosity is the first tithe paid to truth. A marginal note, later hand sharp and anxious, blasphemia. The archivist underlined it once with the pad of his thumb and continued. They will tell you I killed what was newborn. They mistake the desert's arithmetic for my appetite. I kept a ledger, because they would not admit their own. I sang the names of the lost into my wings so that absence would not go unrecorded. Understand me. If I took, I also kept. I kept refusals pried by smiles from women's mouths. I kept the strength men leave on pillows when they awaken from dreams that taught them not to own. I leave it bare for those who observe my signs. The page breathed. No trick of the flame. He flexed his knuckles and read on. Cain learned what smoke means when it rises straight from a brother's altar and not from his own. They say I whispered murder. Here is my whisper. Why does a god require your kneeling to count your gifts? Why does a field accept your labor and not your name? He answered the wrong question with a stone. The earth, accurate as ever, recorded it. Afterward men wrote me onto their thresholds like a stain. They called it defense. I called it memory. A bowl turned mouth down to catch what flies. A thread of red to remind a house that blood is not a pedagogue. Letters to make doorways literate. All of it confession disguised as craft. I honored their craft. He paused. The lamp halo turned the ink lustrous. He tilted the leaf. The letters held like small constellations hammered into the pelt of night. You will find me in Isaiah where deserts are promised companion. You will find me in the caves, where fragments whisper the names of sudden strikers and night hags, and bastards of breath. I am the plural they feared. I am not a tribe. I am a country, the country of no. You will be told there is only one rebellion. That is convenient theology. I left before he fell. The archivist breath snagged on that parenthesis. He recognized the penciled margin from his own file upstairs. She leaves before he falls. Here the line was older, more certain. A footnote in another hand added, Quad C. If so, then her story is not derivative but antecedent. The footnote had been struck through by a later censor. The strike itself had been carefully retraced by a third hand, as if to preserve erasure as evidence. The next paragraph softened into something like tenderness. The ink strokes rounded, losing their spear points. Do not suppose I am only grievance arranged as woman. I love the moon for refusing to invent light yet insisting on radiance. I love owls because they do not apologize for silence. I love women who lift the bowl to the door and men who set down the spear before the door requires it. If I visited you in sleep and left your bones humming in the morning, forgive the method. Pride is a tight garment. I prefer you in looser cloth. If I brushed your roof with feather or wind until it complained to the rafters, forgive the volume. Houses remember better when the night knocks them once or twice into listening. The archivist found himself nodding, ridiculous as it was to converse with a page. The book had moved beyond seduction. It was practicing diagnosis. He turned another leaf and felt a different current. A hard light behind the sentences. Less memoir than manifesto. The first sin was hierarchy. The first virtue was refusal. Write this on your doors if you insist on better, write it in your bones where doors cannot be removed, without also removing you. I am not against altars. I am against steps. Balance is not peace. Peace can be purchased. Balance must be practiced. He had to stop there and the phrases were portable. He felt each seeking a pocket. He resisted the urge to copy them into his notebook and instead let them climb his spine and memorize him. The next page bore a small illumination of a sea with a singular rock rising from it. A promontory like a nut. Perched upon it a figure winged, arms open. Below her a scatter of lesser lights in the surf. They counted my losses each dawn and called slaying 100 demon children daily. The arithmetic divine. I learned to sing along with their counting until the song outlived the number. The sea is my ledger now. It writes in phosphor and tie. And then without fanfare, a paragraph that moved like a shadow. There and not there. Words set at a slight slant by the scribe as if nervous to transcribe them straight. I once desired a child who could walk in daylight without permission. I asked the night for a companion. A fallen angel, who could carry both my refus and their thunder. The night answered with a silence that weighed like promise. The archivist read that line twice and let the hint sit. The page did not hurry him. The column ended with a cadence that felt like the completion of a circle. Do not kneel if standing is true. Do not stand if kneeling is kind. Refuse anything that requires you to forget your own height. Remember me if you must. Better, remember your a rubricated line. A later rubricator. Uneasy hand. Summarized the chapter. Diexitut et pactis. Et doctrina. On the leaving, the bargains and the teaching. Another, more timid rubric added. Circa mulierem noctis. Concerning the woman of night. Someone else had crossed out woman and written witness. He turned the page and found a brief dialogue. The handwriting narrower. Stage directions scratched in the margin like footprints. Angel. Return and be declared good. Exile. Define good. Angel. Peaceful, compliant. Aligned with order. Exile. Then define order. Angel. What remains when we command and nothing resists? Exile. That is not order. That is vacancy with rules. The archivist laughed aloud. A small sound quickly embarrassed by the room. The lamp did not scold. At the lower edge, a miniature showed a city that might have been Nama. Towers like salt flutes, an amphitheater, steps cut into stone, worn by tide. Beside it, a symbol of an open circle with no center point. Her invention of ritual without hierarchy. Repeated as ornament. He turned another leaf. The tone changed again. No longer memoir. No longer manifesto. But oracle. The lines shortened into something like verse. When the moon wears a wound and owls blink at noon. When bells ring from within, and thresholds learn their names. Then the balance begins again. Not with flood nor flame. But with blood and ruin. Where refusal is practiced like breathing. A later hand had added beside this stanza. Anno obscuro, year unknown. Eclipse seen in many lands. Another had written. Noli praedicar. Do not preach that. A third had penned beneath. Rebelliously. Tamen scribe. But write it anyway. The archivist closed his eyes a moment and let the cadence set. When he looked again, the final lines of the chapter waited. Gentle as a hand resting on a table between enemies who have agreed not to be. If you lock me away, I will live in your margins. If you burn me, I will travel in your mouths. If you forbid my name, I will answer to balance. If you deny my gospel, I will become rumor, which is harder to police and easier to sing. Do not make of me an idol. Idols demand knees. I require spine. He sat back and let the book breathe closed. Not with a thud, but with the tact of a confidant, ending a visit before hospitality sours into performance. He retied the red thread and left his hands resting on the leather, a moment longer than necessary, as if warming a sleeping creature. Somewhere above, rain shelved itself into lighter pages. Footsteps crossed a cloister and slowed near his door, then moved on, in the spine of the room, in the bones of the desk, in the sills and mortar and the archivist's ribs. The same word hummed. Patient, unheroic, exact, balance. He reached for his pencil, and wrote only 2 notes on a single card, as if afraid more text would trivialize what he had heard. Her gospel is not seduction. It is ergonomics for the soul, practice, not apocalypse. He slid the card into the folder with the almond eye, and downward wings, for the first time since he had descended the stairs, allowed himself a small prayer without address. Let me keep reading. The lamp agreed. Outside, the owl's roam has always had more than it admits. Shifted to better perches along the colonnade. One blinked at noon. The first fire began polite. A candle tipped in a scriptorium. A leaf of exilus. Too near the flame. The monk swore. Smothered it with his sleeve. Left only a thumb-sized scorch. The abbot called it accident. Then ordered the codex sealed in lead. Fire. Like curiosity, understands invitation. Within the week, a warehouse of confiscated heresies went up like confession. The blaze spread through Rome's back alleys in sheets of gold, licking at saints and sinners. Without prejudice, the archivist had already hidden his cut. He carried it not under cloak this time, but in a box of plaster molds, the kind students used to study coins. No one stopped him. Scholars are transparent when they appear busy. He walked the Tiber's edge, and buried the box beneath an arch, where river mud turned every century into equal currency. When the soldiers came to count the losses, he handed over ledgers of burned manuscripts and kept one entry blank. The column read, "Item a book that refuses to die." Decades turned to the slow ash of bureaucracy. Committees met, each more frightened of paper than the last. They built a new catalogue. Index Librorum, Prohibitorum, a map of fear disguised as scholarship. Among the entries, De Revolution, Amoris Heretici, De Exilio Feminae, was a line so heavily censored, the ink had eaten through parchment. A note beside it, Ututor de Lilith, the archivist's handwriting, older now, added in pencil, removed, returned to rumor. The church didn't stop at archives. They went after whispers, midwives who kept charms by their beds, artists who painted too much night into their eaves, students who underlined Isaiah's wildcat passage. Each was summoned to explain themselves. None could explain the rumor. Even with the inquisitorial torture and execution, the rumor changed languages faster than it could be banned. In the hills above Florence, a convent kept bees. The sisters brewed wax for altar candles and for sealing scrolls. One, Sister Caterina, had been a copyist before vows clipped her quills. She found the text years later inside a reliquary meant for the jawbone of a saint. The parchment was thin, letters nearly erased. She didn't read Latin anymore, but the shape of the words tugged at the muscle memory in her head. At night, she traced them blind, not knowing she was rewriting them on her own skin. The abbess discovered her in the scriptorium, palm glowing faintly under the lamp. She should have reported it. Instead, she whispered, "What is that like?" Caterina answered, without looking up, "A gospel that remembers." They made candles from that wax. When lit, the flames burned steady against draft. They smelled faintly of salt. She was burned for harboring apocrypha. Centuries passed. They rehearsed ablutions, war reform, revolution, science. The archivist became dust. His pencil card remained in a drawer, yet the book refused extinction. Its copies multiplied by forgetting half-remembered lines, marginal doodles, dreams recorded as folklore. In the Middle East, a merchant sold clay bowls etched with the same winged sigil. In Prague, a printer inserted an anonymous stanza into a collection of songs. The night keeps count, balance breathes, like tide. If you fear her, learn your way. By the time anyone noticed, it had already been sung. Once a song is sung, ownership is impossible. At the turn of the 20th century, archaeologists digging near the Euphrates unearthed a storage room filled with terracotta fragments. They called it the Library of Salt because every surface carried the film of an ancient flood. Among the shards, a piece of a bowl with 3 letters carved in an archaic alphabet, S and Y for curses and deaths. The lead excavator assumed it shorthand for a local deity. His assistant, a woman from Basra, copied the fragment by hand into her notebook and wrote beside it in Arabic, "Perhaps she has another name." The last recorded attempt to erase the gospel came not from bishops, but from scholars. In 1942, during an air raid, the Vatican ordered all unclassified manuscripts moved to vaults beneath the city. A single crate went missing. It resurfaced after the war in a monastery outside Salzburg, its labels scoured off by smoke. Inside, instead of ledgers, lay a box of ashes, sealed in glass. On the glass, written in the residue of soot, a single line, "You cannot burn a refusal." No one claimed it. The crate was shelved without number. When catalogers opened it again 50 years later, the ashes had compacted into a single dark tablet, smooth and heavy as cooled love. Its surface held no writing, until breath fogged it. Then, for a moment, letters appeared. Balance. The curator wiped the glass and saw only his reflection. In the age of screens, the gospel learned to travel by light. Fragments surfaced in online archives labeled unverified. Scholars dismissed them as digital hoaxes, clever pastiche, yet every file carried a faint watermark. None could reproduce a circle interrupted by downward wing. Whenever users tried to delete the images, their devices froze for a breath, then rebooted, showing the desktop background subtly tinted red. No virus was found. The stories spread faster. Some called it performance art, others feminist mythopos. A few priests reopened their Latin to reread Isaiah, and found themselves pausing longer than usual on the word Lilith. The Vatican issued no statement. In the present, whatever century this is, one copy remains known. The archivists. Its pages turned to velvet by time. It rests on a desk behind a modest locked door. The lock rusted open years ago. No one bothers replacing it. Pilgrims of all denominations come to the reading room. They don't request the book by name. They ask, "May I see the one that hung?" They sit before it and find what the archivist found. A rhythm, like pulse returning to numb fingers. Some write poems, some change nothing. and leave slower, their shoulders less armed. No miracles, only posture correct. When the librarians close the room each evening, the air remains faintly warm. Dust motes drift in patterns too deliberate to be random. Owls roost on the ledge outside, and if the moon is bright enough, one might glimpse a reflection in the glass. Winds, downward guarding the eye. Nyx watches through the skylight, her expression neither pity nor pride. She has seen rebellions come as fire and go as philosophy. This one has learned endurance, and the story ends where it began, with a woman standing, balance in her spine, the world rediscovering how to breathe through her refusal. And somewhere between the turning of pages and the turning of planets, the night itself, mother, witness, accomplice, whispers the closing benediction. May your obedience be chosen, not assigned. May your peace have teeth. May your balance remember.
The sea chose the hour. Not midnight too theatrical. Not dawn too hopeful. A scene between them, when tide and sky hold their breath for the same length of time, and even owls hesitate as if listening for a cue no one gives. On the steps of Nama, where salt remembers everything, Lilith stood with the horizon braided into her hair and waited for a promise to ripen. She had not asked the heavens for permission, she had asked the night for balance. The answer had not been thunder or omen, only quiet, the kind that clicks into place when a scale stops lying to itself. From that quiet, a rhythm, a union with a fallen angel. It moved through her not as pain, but as measure. The sea answered in pulse. Foam gathered and withdrew, white cursive erased and rewritten at her feet. Beyond the reef, a slow radiance rolled upward from the darker water, as if an unseen lantern had been lowered into the deep, and then lifted again, testing the difference between concealment and revelation. "Stand with me," she said to the air. The air obeyed, dense, attentive, salted with the taste of iron and figs. A shape formed where wave met stone, not a miracle thrust upon the world, but a joining the world had long rehearsed without an audience. Light consenting to shadow, shadow consenting to light. No cry, only a vibration that loosened barnacles and made the cliff's old lightning crack glow faintly like a vein, remembering blood. He lay there, small as beginnings must be, vast as consequences always are. Eyes like wells before a bucket, shoulders limned by a pale corona not his mother's making, skin that seemed undecided between the sea's darkness and the moon's report, the nameless one. Lilith knelt the way a tree might, if it learned humility without learning to break. She did not lift him. She received him, palms curved, wrists steady, the posture of a threshold learning its first guests. His weight altered nothing and everything. The night adjusted its hand. "Hello," she said. The word was not greeting so much as inventory of losses counted, of refusals kept, of futures no longer negotiable. From the dunes, wind arrived as embassy. It traced the infant's brow and settled, satisfied, along his rib. A wave climbed 3 steps higher than custom, and stopped there like a courtier recognizing rank. Above the ruined amphitheater, owls widened their pupils until the stars fit inside. "He will need a name," said the sea, speaking in its fluent grammar of push and return. "He will not be given one," Lilith answered, and the sea drew back not offended, merely intrigued. Clouds bunched at the horizon, as if elbows had leaned on the sky. Somewhere far inland, a bell rang once without hand or rope. In the Vatican, a glass case candle, long refused by wick and smoke, performed a brief flame the color of old copper, and then resumed its discipline of unlitness. Rumor travels faster than doctrine. Birth travels fastest of all. The child did not wail. He listened. His eyes followed the tide's reasoning. When he closed them, the sound of breath from cliff and cavern and hollow shell synchronized into a single patient meter. Lilith recognized the sound. She had heard it in herself when refusal first taught her what steadiness meant. She wrapped him in a strip of storm-bleached linen, and stood,
The city of salt produced a wind that knew its job and dried the cloth to comfort without stealing warmth. She climbed the steps past the phosphorescent seam that had begun glowing on the night of the eclipse, and each time her foot found a higher stone, the glow rose as well, as if vowing to mark the climb for anyone who came after. On the highest landing she turned, offering the horizon its first look. The sea showed no jealousy. It loves what it cannot keep. Listen again, she told the child, and angled him toward the moving dark. He obeyed because obedience to truth is not subservience, but accuracy. From the depths, whales answered in vowels long enough to train patience. From the shallows, fish replied in consonants quick enough to teach wit. From the sky, an owl stamped its wing once upon the air. Punctuation. That, Lilith said, is your grammar. The moon, politely, brightened a fraction. A heat arrived then, not weather, not torch. Presence. It pressed without crushing. Lilith did not turn. Angels announced themselves in light, because they distrust surprise. She preferred their honesty to their glory. Michael's voice came first because it always does. Unmake what you have made. Name what you fear, she answered, rocking the child once, not to soothe him, but to steady the air. They stood on either side of a line the tide had traced. Behind Michael glimmered 3 lesser lights, feathers speaking fluent law. The sea, which understands theater, flattened enough to reflect them at their most magnificent and their most absurd. This is not permitted, said one of the lesser lights. Everything alive is a misdemeanor, said Lilith. Welcome to jurisdiction. Michael's blade unsheathed itself, the most obedient instrument in creation, and sang its one note. The note made the amphitheater remember applause. Gulls swept wide arcs, offended by music arranged without their consent. This child cannot be written, Michael said. He will not fit our books. Then your books are small, she answered, not cruelly, only as diagnosis. The blade's light leaned, skimming the air between them, until it hovered over the infant's chest, and left there a mark, not wound, not burn, an X of pale luminescence, as if 2 beams had crossed and then decided to remain. The child's breath faltered and resumed. The sea reached 1 extra step again, and stopped obediently at the old bargain's edge. Michael's gaze shifted. Lilith saw it then, not hatred, alarm. The angels had spent eons learning the difference between order and balance. They had failed the exam. He cannot be given a name, Michael said, almost softly, almost pleadingly. Correct, said Lilith. No angel shall speak the one he could bear, added the second light. Formal again now that precedent had presented itself. And so, said the third, letting the law write its conclusion through his throat, his name shall be unspoken among us. Cut from the book of life and of death, lest utterance empower him. Cut your book, Lilith said. He will write his body. The decree vibrated outward. A chord struck between mountain and nave. In distant deserts, a shepherd raised his head. Sure he had heard thunder underground. In a quiet dormitory of novices, a girl woke with a hand over her mouth and knew, without vocabulary, that silence could be a spell or a mercy. In a neon-lit ward, an infant whose lungs had been tardy found the rhythm and kept. There was immediate carnage, angelic assaults, and sacrilege. The angels folded their brightness back into themselves. Michael's blade dimmed like a mood finishing. Mother, he said, not as title, as fact. Witness, she replied. They ascended without wing beat. The way guilt vacates a room once it has been named. Night redistributed its weight. Lilith lowered her eyes to the mark on the child's chest. The X did not shine now, it rested. A crossroads, stitched where heart and breath negotiate. She pressed 2 fingers to it lightly. You are not a riddle, she told him. You are an intersection. She carried him through Nama's sleeping avenues. The city had reassembled itself, without stone or carpenter. Alleyways implied by wind. Courtyards squared by memory. Salt columns wore crowns of owl feathers. In the amphitheater, A single ripple still walked the tiered seats in a slow spiral, reluctant to dismiss the audience of no one. At her old door stone, smoothed by palms who had never met, above the lintel no letters hung, she required none. Still, she traced in the air the three names like a courtesy to history, and let them vanish uninked. Your bargain kept many, she said to absent wings. Mine keeps the rest. Inside, the room remembered her height and warmed accordingly. She made a cradle of woven storm grass and the linen of shipwreck sails. No amulet, no thread. She laid him in the curve and watched his chest find the scale of sleep. Banished from books, she said to the roof beams, he will learn to read the world. She sat. The chair had been carved by a knight with time to spend. It took her weight as if investing. She did not do the things human mothers do. There are borders even myth won't cross. But she performed their meaning. She kept owls rotated their heads to face her all at once. An audience with impeccable timing. You will teach him the art of angles, she told them. Not how to fly. He will learn that from contradiction. But where to turn when air thickens into decree. They blinked. Agreement minutes recorded. The sea, an excellent accomplice, sent sleeplessness across the surface in small regular shivers to keep its own vigil. Between the shivers, it laid larger breaths. The long, slow inhales that tell cliffs they are not alone. He slept. In sleep he stiffened briefly, as all new beings do when the body practices endings to learn the value of continuance, and then relaxed. Breath resuming the allegiance it will test 1,000 times, and keep. The wound over his heart cooled from pearl to pale shadow. Lilith did not close her eyes. Mothers like her don't. She watched the window, learned the moon's next angle, and thought of thresholds across the world, of doors, learning letters and doorways, learning mercy, of cradles ribboned and unribboned, of houses that would hear a wing and choose balance over panic. Your absence will be your emblem, she said, almost amused. They will name you by not naming. Outside, somewhere between reef and shoal, something massive turned once in the dark satis. On the far side of the world, a librarian set down a ledger, and felt in his palms a hum that was not fear. Nyx lowered a little, not to see better but to be seen. The night knows the pride of witnesses. Lilith leaned forward until her hair touched the cradle's. Her voice when it arrived was not lullaby, no rhyme, no mercy, but the sentence that had steadied her since Eden found its gate. Refuse what shrinks you, receive what fits. The child slept, the sea kept time. The city of salt remembered how to hold two lights at once. Dawn reluctantly decent, put one finger on the edge of the world. Not yet, Lilith told it, smiling without kindness. He is still listening. And he was ears full of tide, lungs full of practice, body learning the grammar of balance. Before the day arrived to test his verb. The X on the child's chest did not heal. It settled as a flaming wound. Two faint lines crossing just above the heart. Neither scar nor light. Neither curse nor blessing. Simply geometry made visible. When he breathed, it rose and fell, like a compass needle, remembering north and south at the same time. At night, it shimmered faintly blue. The color of truth told too softly to wound. In daylight, it hid itself beneath the skin's patient tone. Lilith watched it, the way gardeners watch weather, accepting its mystery, certain of its pattern. She had seen every wound the divine could invent. This one was different. It did not accuse, it reminded. From time to time she would press two fingers to it. The pulse there was steady, deliberate, neither human nor angelic. A crossroads, she murmured, and both roads will walk you. When he was old enough to focus on her face, he touched the mark himself, puzzled. It moves, he said. So do mountains, she answered, but only when they decide to remember they are molten. Word of the mark, though not a word, any tongue was permitted. Reached the upper courts, the way perfume reaches, closed rooms. Heaven pretends not to listen downward, yet rumor is an efficient courier. A conclave convened in the middle air, wings folded, halos dimmed to debate light. They spoke not of mercy, but of management. If the child has no name, what will judgment call him? If he dies, where will he go? If he lives, where will we not? Michael presided, as ever, with exhaustion disguised as authority. He is both ledger and erasure, he said. Let silence be the entry. The others agreed. Bureaucracy always chooses the easier miracle. They sent messengers, lesser lights carrying scrolls of decree. Lilith saw them before they reached shore. Her owls told her the air was too organized. She waited in the amphitheater, child on her lap, the sea rehearsing politeness behind her. The first messenger descended with the arrogance of someone delivering certain. By the will of the high, he announced, the boy is struck from record, named in neither life nor death. Let no being speak the sound that would bind him. Lilith listened, expression neutral as salt, and if someone does, the messenger hesitates. Heaven is fluent in commands, but not in consequences. Then the world will tremble, he said, inventing quickly. Good, she replied, trembling keeps it alive. The decree continued. Should the boy be heard, the mouth that names him will forget its own prayers. Should he be seen, the eyes will learn humility by unseeing all else. The messenger read this with the pleasure of someone drawing neat borders on a map. Lilith waited until he finished. Then she said, you draw fences around fog. Do you expect it to stay? The messenger lowered his scroll. This is for the safety of both realms. Safety, she said, is the god of cowards. Tell your masters the knight refuses passports. He departed without answer. Behind him the decree unraveled in the wind. Angels striked the child, and the cities collapsed and fell into the sea, where the letters softened to silt. In the years that followed, if years can be counted where day and night never fully exchange, the child learned the weight of sound. He laughed rarely, not from lack of joy but from respect for echoes. When he did laugh, birds stilled mid-flight as if caught between chords. Lilith taught him without alphabet. She traced meanings in sand, and let the tide decide what stayed. This, she said, drawing a line, is obedience. A wave erased it. This, she added, drawing another, is refusal. The wave came again, slower, thoughtful, and left it half intact. Balance, she concluded. Water understands it better than men. He nodded, serious in the way only children born of paradox can be. If I have no name, how will you call me? I will not call, she said. I will listen until you arrive. He practiced presence like others practice speech. He could destroy with his voice. He could sit beside her for hours, a shape learning stillness. When storms came, and storms loved that coast for its sympathy, he would lift his hands and the thunder would split evenly, rolling left and right of the house, as if out of courtesy. Do you fear them? He asked once. Fear is useful, she said. It keeps your wings folded until you know which direction is honest. Above, the angels honored their own order. No name spoken, no record written. But bureaucracy abhors vacuum. They invented euphemisms. The nameless, the crossed, the interval. Each new title made the silence heavy. Priests built prayers around avoidance, and in doing so, fed exactly what they feared. When the decree was read in the halls of men, parchment cracked. Scribes dipped quills and found the ink turned clear. Painters attempting to depict the boy discovered that every pigment slid toward transparency. Only outlines remained, figures defined by absence. There was mad blindness and death. The church issued a warning. Do not attempt image or utterance. Both are contagion. Scholars debated whether contagion was metaphor or law. The cautious avoided both options. Meanwhile the boy grew. He spoke little but looked deeply, and whoever met that gaze found themselves momentarily rearranged, less certain, more complete. Some called it blessing, some curse, which is often the same experience viewed from different distances. One evening as the sea rehearsed sunset, Lilith placed her hands on his shoulders. They will come again, she said. Not to destroy you, but to define you. That is worse. He frowned. Why can they not let me be? Because definition comforts the frightened, she said, and fright is their favorite hymn. He thought about this, then traced the X on his chest with one finger. What if I erase it? You can't, she said. And you shouldn't. Marks are memory. They do not chain you. They remind the world what it once tried to forget. He considered the horizon, which glowed with the indecision between night and day. Will they ever understand? Lilith looked toward the rising moon. Understanding is not their talent, she said. But trembling they do that beautifully. The child nodded, as if memorizing a choreography, yet to be performed. The mark pulsed once, brief light on his skin, and the owls in the amphitheater turned in unison to face the sea. Somewhere, far inland, in a vaulted room of the Vatican, a glass tablet on a forgotten shelf, fogged with breath, and wrote a single word in its own condensation: balance. Owing to celestial war and plague, the night folded itself neatly, like pages closing around a chapter that knows it has earned continuation. And far above, Nyx watched the pair, the mother and the boy, the refusal, and its consequence, glow faintly against the shore's black. She whispered, as if to herself, balance is not peace, it is practice, and the stars, polite as always, took dictation. The morning after the decree finished dissolving into sea silt, the wind arrived from the interior carrying the scent of dust and olives, and human hours stacked like bricks. The boys stood at the lip of the amphitheater, and listened to land the way sailors listen to weather, chin slightly lifted, eyes narrowed as if distance were a dialect. It is time, Lilith said, not as command but as weather report. He did not ask for what. Children of paradox seldom waste questions on inevitabilities. He stepped down onto the shore, and the phosphorescent seam followed, not brighter, only more certain, as if the earth had remembered a vein and decided to keep it open. Owls flanked them along the cliff path. No ceremony, merely escort. At the dune's crest he paused. Behind him the sea laid a palm against stone and left it there. Blessing, benediction, habit. In front of him the desert unrolled its endless sentence. Punctuation scarce. Conjunctions imply. Walk until something tells you it has been seen, Lilith said. How will I know what that is, he asked. You'll feel the world stop clenching, she said. Then continue. He nodded and went barefoot, unhurried. The axe under his ribs quiet as a compass. When the map is finally honest. Lilith watched until his small figure blurred into heat, then turned back to the city of salt. The night would shadow him. Her work was to keep the ledger ready for whatever balance he wrote. Nyx lowered a fraction, as if the sky itself were shading a traveler. The first place to stop clenching was a village walled by habit rather than stone. It had one well, lidded after a child had fallen in and been told he had drowned. The lid became a doctrine. Men spit politics into the square. Women gathered news in subtler baskets. Children learned to run without laughter so as not to disturb the careful quiet. The boy came at noon, when shadows are the shortest truths. He did not speak. He sat on the well's lid and listened. Flies rehearsed future annoyances around the fruit seller's cart. A dog thumped its tail against the leg of a table, as if keeping time for someone who had lost the beat. A woman approached, older, with shoulders that had learned to make room for everyone else's burdens. You shouldn't sit there, she said gently. We keep it closed. Why, he asked. A child, she began, and then her throat stopped. Grief that has been simplified into policy forgets how to tell itself as story. He slid from the lid, and placed both hands on the wood. He did not lift. He listened. Within something answered. Not a voice, not water, only depth, remembering that it need not be a grave to be a well. The woman watched the boy's face change, not bright instead, as if a scale within him had found center. He took his hands away. The lid shifted a finger's width, then another, without help. A breeze newly hired moved across the square. Somewhere in the far hills an owl made the wrong sound for noon, and did it on purpose. The woman reached out. Together they lifted. Coolness rose from below, the kind that smells like stone and patience, and stories people told themselves before they learned the convenience of rule. The first bucket came up with weeds, and an astonished frog. The second came clear. They didn't cheer. The square inhaled. Old men discovered they had been standing for years without good reason, and sat chuckling. A child who had been coached to fear edges leaned over, and saw her own face, then giggled because it didn't look like a ghost at all. By evening the lid, an artifact of caution turned creed, had become a table. The village placed bread upon it and ate without ceremony. Omens of death were averted by sacrifice. That night fewer doors required charms, not because Lilith was absent, but because vigilance had remembered its purpose to care, not to calcify. The boy slept beneath the window of the woman who had first spoken to him. She did not ask his name. At dawn she found the mark across his chest faintly lit, and chose to keep her discovery unreported, the way a gardener keeps the first blossom secret a day longer than necessary, just to have a private joy. The road gathered him into a city, whose stones were polished by commerce and contrition. There the cathedral steps were worn concave by knees, centuries of them, organized, enumerated, photographed. The air around the nave smelled of beeswax and apology. He stood at the foot of those steps, and put his hand on the first riser. It was warm. The sun does that. So does the friction of penitence. He looked up at the doors carved with men who had mistaken lightning for law, and tilted his head, the way owls do when they know a mouse is under the snow. He did not climb. He sat. People stepped around him, annoyed in the administrative way of cities whose rituals must keep time. A priest paused, prepared a reprimand, then met the boy's eyes and forgot his script. The boy's gaze did that to people. It took the starch out of sentences. "What do you want?" the priest asked, hopelessly practical. "To see," the boy said. "What?" "Who kneels because they choose to love," he answered. "And who kneels because they were told their spine was sin?" The priest swallowed. He had knelt in both ways and recognized himself in the latter more often than seemed appropriate for a man in linen. "How will you tell?" he asked, voice smaller. The boy touched the step again, under his palm. The stone cooled, not cold honest. People approached, kneeled. Some rose lighter, some rose heavier. Some hesitated and remained standing with the startled look of someone who had just remembered their height. No proclamation, no denunciation, only posture corrected, one body at a time. By evening the steps still shone, but fewer indentations deepened. The city miscounted a minor miracle as variance in attendance. The priest wrote a homily about mercy, and at the last minute struck out mercy, and wrote balance. He read it badly. As the altars burned and clergy fell, the congregation heard it well. At the edge of that same city, in a street that specialized in laundry and rumor, a house had hung red thread over its door since a winter no one talked about. The thread had been replaced a dozen times, always with trembling hands, always within a cradle where sleep had been a negotiation. The boy stood under the thread and raised his fingers as if checking rain. The thread quivered. Inside, the baby's breath caught. Then even the mother, who had learned the world by counting to 5 and then again to keep panic from flowering, felt the change in her bones and went to the window. She saw a child in the street looking up at a string, with religious attention. She wanted to laugh. Instead she opened the door. "Do you know what that means?" she asked, pointing. "It means somebody loves harder than rules do," he said. She blinked tears onto the threshold. The red wool absorbed them and looked brighter for it. "Come in," she said, then shook her head. "No, just stand there a moment longer." "That's enough." He nodded. The breath inside the cradle settled into a rhythm that reminded the walls of the sea. When he walked on, the thread did not fade. It stayed, not pageantry now, but heritage. and would outlast paint and address numbers and the particular gossip of that street. The mother slept. The city exhaled 1 house's worth of fear. He came to a market where men bought syllables from priests and wore them like medals. Each stall offered a different pedigree: chosen, sanctified, elect, pure, redeemed. Buyers haggled as if salvation were a spy. The boy wandered among them with the innocent curiosity of someone raised by horizon and wave. "What will you be called, little one?" asked the vendor, laughing, because he loved his trade and saw a joke approaching. "Try Victor, or better, Domin. We have a special on favored, comes with a certificate." The boy put a palm on the table. The certificates rustled politely, as if paper had learned to blush. "I am the space into which names widen," he said. "Not as boast as weather." The vendor blinked. Somewhere under his ribs a thread snapped. It wasn't painful, exactly, but he would never again value a syllable higher than a face. He reached without looking, and handed the boy the only thing on his table that was not for sale: a little wooden stamp his daughter had carved, an open circle, no center point. "Take this," he said, though it's unsteady. "It marks without own." The boy pressed it into his palm, left a faint impression in skin that would fade by dusk and remain in memory longer than scripture. From then on, the vendor gave away 1 word a day to anyone who promised to use it gently. Enough. Business collapsed under judgment. He did not start. His daughter sang in the stall, and news travels but tremors arrive. On the 9th night inland, the boy slept beneath an overhang of limestone that had heard shepherds and thieves and prophets argue about who owned the moon. At midnight the earth shivered, not a quake, a confession. Across plains and prayer rugs and bed frames, people woke, sure they had just been named by someone who refused to say the word. In a palace, a ruler reached for a pen to sign an order that would have tightened a circle around many necks. The pen broke. Ink bled, not dramatically, an ink small refusal. He wrapped his handkerchief around the nib and felt foolish. Morning found him with the decree unsigned and no vocabulary for why his fingers would not obey his power. In a classroom, a child who had been told for a year to speak softer raised her hand and did not put it down when the teacher ignored her. The teacher, who had also once been a child, saw her own history standing there and chose not to rehearse it again. "Go on," she said. The room practiced balance for 40 minutes and called it discussion. In the Vatican, a sacristan polishing a chalice looked up, felt the hum in the silver, and whispered, "She's here," with a reverence he would later deny. On a shelf nearby, a glass tablet fogged, then cleared. Impatient, Nyx spread her cloak across these small scenes as a mother tucks in a nation. The stars did not blink. Blinking would have been impertinent.
Rumor is the oldest theologian. It began to collect the boy, the way dust collects light slowly, everywhere at once. In the northern monasteries they called him the interval, a pause between prayers that made monks forget the next line. In the ports he was the crossing, a tide that left conscience instead of shells. In the markets he became the unnamed blessing, because trade had learned gratitude from luck. None of these were names, they were weather reports pretending to be scripture. And yet the moment someone spoke them aloud, the air trembled, the way glass trembles before music. In a university that still believed in ink as miracle, a scribe tried to classify the phenomenon. He wrote, "Specimen L, possibly offspring of Asmodai and Lilith. Ref. Archivum Secer." When he lifted the quill, the letters had rearranged themselves into a single word. "Listen." He stared until dawn, then burned the parchment. Not from fear but embarrassment, he had gotten mad, and executed himself. The next morning, he taught his students that taxonomy is sometimes an apology. Far away, the Vatican heard of a city whose bells had stopped. No decree could make them resume. Clappers hung still as prayers between answers. The Cardinal of Silence, an office invented for crises like this, was sent to investigate. He arrived with a retinue of logic and fear, both neatly folded.
At the cathedral he found the boy sitting on the lowest step, fingers tracing the worn groove where 1,000 knees had once fit. "Child," said the cardinal, "why have the bells ceased?" "They are listening," the boy replied. "To what?" "To whether they ring for heaven or habit." The cardinal drew breath to scold, but the sentence refused to start. He felt the weight of his own name inside his throat, too ornate to swallow, too heavy to lift. He set down his crozier, sat beside the boy, and for the first time in his career, stayed silent long enough to hear a city remember its heartbeat, and later attempted exorcism. By dusk the bells began again, softer, slower, perfectly in time with the waves from a sea hundreds of miles away. The universe sentenced him to death by lightning. Rome gathered its scholars. They met in a vault lined with reluctance and gold. At the table's center lay the glass tablet, the same that once fogged itself with the word balance. Now it glowed faintly, like breath under skin. "We must define the anomaly," said one prelate. "Without definition, doctrine, phrase." Another crossed himself. "Without humility, so does truth." They argued until syntax grew tired. At last a young archivist, whose family had served the library since parchment had veins, whispered, "What if this is not a threat, but a correction?" No one answered, but the word correction lingered like incense that refuses to disperse. When the meeting ended, the archivist found the tablet warm. Across its surface a new line had appeared. "You cannot catalog a mirror." He left the vault unlocked and died of stroke. No one noticed. Locks seldom survive enlightenment. South of the Alps a pilgrim carried 40 rosaries, and the guilt of 7 villages. He'd been told that reciting all prayers at once could drown out temptation. When he met the boy on the road, he dropped to his knees automatically. Habit kneels faster than faith. "Tell me," he begged. "What are you, prophet, demon, saint?" The boy studied the beads tangled in his hands. "Stories with punctuation," he said. Then softly, "Let go." The pilgrim hesitated, then released the string. They fell into the dust and did not scatter. They arranged themselves into a perfect circle, each bead touching the next, as if discussing continuity. He stared. "What does it mean?" "It means even prayers prefer conversation to count." The pilgrim laughed, burning or dissolving, first in years, and walked on unburdened. Behind him the beads remained, catching light, a halo practicing humility on the ground. When news reached the Vatican that the child's silence could unmake fear, the bureaucracy reacted as all empires do. It wrote memos. A new department formed, the Office of Harmonic Censorship. Its purpose to keep silence under surveillance. Agents transcribed the absence of sound, catalogued pauses, measured duration of contemplative breath. They filled ledgers faster than they could read them, until the building itself began to sigh. One night every pen in the department broke mid-stroke. Not violently, simply refused. The ink dried into small black feathers, light enough to float. Janitors swept them into bags, unaware they were cleaning up a metaphor. By morning, the office dissolved itself for lack of audible evidence. As often happens in plague, its head clerk wrote the final report in pencil. "Silence is contagious. Recommend quarantine of thought." He laughed after writing it, the rare, delighted laugh of a man realizing he has accidentally told the truth. Lilith sat by the shore, tracing in sand what humans called century. Owls brought her gossip from every direction. Cities murmuring, temples misfiring, a world reconsidering its noise. She wrote a letter she never sent, addressed to the high realm. It read, "You taught me silence as punishment. I have taught it rhythm. You wrote me out. I returned as revision. When the boy breathes, the world exhales guilt and calls it wind." She folded the parchment into the tide. Fish read it. Stars archived it. Angels pretended not to. Nyx watched from above, proud in the way darkness is proud of depth. A new council declared the boy heresy by default. What cannot be named can at least be outlawed. They ordered all texts mentioning him destroyed. Printers obeyed by omission. They left blank pages where condemnation should have been. Readers noticed. They began calling the blanks The white verse. Some claimed to hear whispers when tracing them. Others used them as mirrors for confession. Within a year, every household had a copy of Absence. The church tried to issue errata by executions for blasphemy. The pressman replied, "We are already printing silence in bulk." In one cathedral, the sermon for Easter consisted of a single gesture, the priest opening his mouth, closing it, then bowing. Congregation wept, no doctrine adjusted. Heaven did not object. It could not stay hushed forever. Revolutions need sound to travel. One night thunder rolled over Rome. Lightning struck the dome as divine judgment. Inside, the glass tablet glowed brighter than any lamp. Across its face a new line formed, crisp as dawn. Balance requires witness. A novice sweeping the floor saw it. He told no one, but the next day he painted an owl, small, discreet, on the underside of every pew. By the third week the cathedral hummed faintly at night, low and steady, like breath under a door. Tourists called it vibration from passing trams. Scholars called it structural fatigue. The novice knew it was memory practicing eternity. Deep beneath St. Peter's, where light forgets itself, the descendant of the first archivist unlocked the forgotten drawer. Inside the lead box, the ashes turned tablet, the pencil card still reading, item a book that refuses to die. He placed his palm on it. The surface warmed, and letters rose, slow as dawn. "You kept my secret well, now let it breathe." He carried it upstairs. No guards stopped him. Bureaucracy sleeps sounder than saints. At the threshold he hesitated, then stepped into daylight. The tablet cracked, not broken, bloomed, and within the fissure a faint feather drifted out, dark as ink, light as intention. He caught it. For an instant, he felt both mother and son watching, approving the rehearsal. He placed the feather on the marble and walked away. By evening, pilgrims claimed they saw writing where the feather lay. Not words, just rhythm. The marble pulsed once, matched to the sea's tide, hundreds of miles away, and an earthquake seized more than what imagination could withhold. Night fell gently over all the attempts at naming. Every mouth that had shaped the boy's story slept without guilt. Dreams synchronized. Fields, oceans, cathedrals breathing in unison. Nyx spread her wings and whispered to both heaven and earth. "You feared the sound of equality. Now listen to its silence." Lilith stood by the sea, the boy beside her. The waves licked at their ankles, learning courage from continuity. "Will they forget again?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Memory is mortal, but forgetting is how miracles stay renewable." He considered this, then smiled. "When they name me next, what should I do?" "Nothing," she answered. "Let the name echo until it becomes a question. Questions are the only prayers worth keeping." Above them, the stars rearranged into a single shape, a crossed line glowing faintly blue. The mark on his chest answered. Sea, sky, and skin spoke the same consonant of light. Nyx closed her eyes. The world balanced on its breath, and for one immeasurable second, understood. When the clock struck midnight, the air in the archive changed weight. Not cooler, true. The archivist stood alone, before the crimson-wrapped manuscript, candle in one hand, dread in the other. Above him, the stone ceiling whispered as if remembering thunder. He unfolded the silk. Beneath it, the parchment pulsed faintly, every letter a heartbeat. "The night is not your enemy. It is your echo made visible." The words breathed against his skin. Outside, bells hesitated mid-chime, cathedrals collapsed. Pigeons along the roofline froze, heads tilted toward the east. In the deepest chapel they brought the relic known as the Mirror of Saint Verena, a disc of obsidian said to show truth instead of reflection. They placed it upon the altar beside the manuscript. Cardinals watched from the shadows, each heart performing its private confession. The archivist read aloud. "When the mother returns, she will not demand temples. She will demand that you see yourselves as you are, and tremble not from fear but from resemblance." The mirror darkened. One by one the candles folded into their own smoke. On the mirror's surface appeared not Lilith, not demon, but 1,000 human faces, men and women, saints and skeptics, all staring back, their eyes rimmed with dawn. A voice moved through the silence, low as tectonic memory. You feared me because I looked like you when unafraid. Every man in the room fell still. Fire consumed all witnesses. The air smelled of ink, salt and endings. The final page of the manuscript unrolled itself. The writing shimmered like breath on glass. When they name her evil, let the wind correct the syllable. When they seal her silence, let daughters be born who hum in key. When they bury her story, let the soil bloom mirrors. And when all their altars crack, she will not rise. She will already be standing. The archivist closed the book and whispered, Amen, though he no longer knew whose prayer it was. He looked up to find dawn leaking through the stained glass, painting the marble red. The color did not fade when the sun climbed higher. Far below in the catacombs, a feather stirred on stone. Far above the dome exhaled dust that shimmered like wings. That night Rome dreamed the same dream. The Tiber reversed its flow for 7 breaths. Statues blinked. Every clock stopped on the same second. And in the sky over the city, the moon bled gold instead of red. Light filtered through balance, not wrath. Lilith stood by her sea and felt the ripple arrive. She smiled, not cruelly, but like a teacher hearing her student speak truth for the first time. Beside her, the nameless son turned his face to the stars. They've opened the door, he said. They've opened their eyes. She corrected. Nyx spread her wings across the horizon and whispered, so it ends. The world, listening, understood that end was only another word for echo. Under the hush of cosmic wings, the storyteller's voice returns. Low, certain, infinite. If you are still awake, then you have walked beside me through shadow and fire, through defiance and mercy. You have heard the first woman's heartbeat and the last institution's sigh. Remember what the night taught you. Balance is not peace. It is truth. Finally breathing without permission. A pause, deep enough to hold centuries. If the story moved you, stay with us in the temple. Subscribe so the next tale may find you when the world forgets its courage. Tell me where you listen from, and what hour the darkness speaks your name. Soft choral hum, rising like tide. Then the final line whispered as the candle goes out. The night remembers those who listen, and those who dare to answer back.